The morning light spilled across the plains in ribbons of gold and ash, each blade of grass tipped with frost that would melt before the hour was out. The rancher's son rode the north fence line, his breath ghosting in the chill air, leather creaking under his weight. The land spread endless before him, beautiful in a way that could turn cruel without warning. He knew every rise and hollow, every wind-carved ridge where a coyote might watch unseen. His father's voice, remember more than heard, rode alongside him. A man can keep cattle, but it's the land that keeps a man honest. He reined in at a broken post. Wires sagged low, trampled by something heavier than deer. Hoof prints led into hills, wide and deep. The earth there was darker, burned in places, as if a fire had come and gone in the night. He knelt, brushing his fingers through the blackened dirt, still warm. Whoever had passed through had done so recently, and not with mind toward hiding. The town lay 2 hours' ride south, a handful of buildings clustered along a narrow river. He hadn't planned to go there today, but the tracks told him something was moving across the land, something with weight and purpose. He swung into the saddle, following the trail until it thinned into the dust road that led toward voices and smoke from cooking stoves. He kept his hat low as he tied his horse outside the mercantile. People here knew him more because of his father than himself, and he'd learned it was better to listen than to be seen too much. The conversations in the street carried the sharpness of news not yet cooled. Someone had spotted riders near Dry Creek. Someone else swore they'd heard shots in the distance, though no body had been found. Inside, the smell of flour and lamp oil hung in the air. He took what he needed from the shelves, beans, coffee, nails, and laid them on the counter. The storekeeper leaned in as he tallied the cost. "You heard?" he asked without looking up. "They say the old Outlaw's back." The son said nothing, just counted coins into the man's hand. But the words sat heavy. His father had spoken of that name before, never in detail, only as a warning. A man whose shadow crossed both sides of the law, whose temper had burned ranches to their foundations when crossed. If he had returned, the land would know trouble before the month was out. On his way out, he saw her. She was standing beside a chestnut mare, saddle worn but clean. Dust streaked her trousers. Her boots carried the road, and a pistol rode easy on her hip. She was speaking to no one, yet seemed aware of everything. The angle of the sun, the shuffle of boots behind her, the way his gaze paused longer than it should. Her eyes met his, steady and without invitation, but something in them caught him. Not softness exactly, but a weight, as though she had seen more than her share and carried it like an old scar. She turned away first, swinging into the saddle and riding toward the northern hills without a word. He watched her go, the dust from her horse drifting in the wind like smoke from a dying fire. He left town soon after, riding back toward the ranch. The sun slid lower, shadows drawing long fingers over the plain. Along the way, he found the tracks again, fresh this time. Her horse's prints crossed those of several others, heavier, more erratic. A bad mix. Men riding without discipline, their paths cutting across grazing land that wasn't theirs. He followed until the scent of a campfire reached him, with smoke carried on the wind. From a rise above a shallow gully, he could see them, for riders, their horses tied loose, gear scattered as though they'd been in a hurry. They sat close to the flames, their voices too low to catch in the breeze, but the laughter was sharp-edged, the kind that didn't come from good humor. And there, half hidden in the shadows, was her mare, reins dragging the dirt, no sign of her. He stayed low, moving along the ridge for a better view, heart tapping slow but hard against his ribs. No sign of struggle, no sound of her voice. Either she was inside that circle by choice or not at all. The wind shifted, carrying with it the smell of whiskey and the faintest hint of gunpowder. One of the men looked up suddenly, scanning the darkening ridge. The sun eased back, pressing himself against the earth, waiting until the voices rose again. He knew better than to rush in alone, but he also knew that trouble had already arrived, and it was sitting just beyond the reach of his rifle. The sky bled orange into purple as he turned for home. The ranch lay quiet when he reached it, the wind rattling the barn doors like restless fingers. He fed the horse, set his supplies down on the table, and lit a single lamp. The room glowed in the soft amber light, but it felt smaller tonight, walls closing in with a knowledge of what he'd seen. Somewhere in those hills, men with bad intentions were moving freely, and the daughter of a man whose name stirred fear was riding among them or against them. Outside, the coyotes began their chorus, thin cries slicing to the night air. He stood in the doorway, listening, until the sound faded into the distance. In the silence that followed, he found himself thinking of her eyes, steady and unflinching, and wondering if she'd seen him at the ridge and why she hadn't called out. The lamp flickered as the wind pressed against the windows. He reached to trim the wick, his father's voice again rising in his memory. Never trust what rides him with the wind. Tonight, the wind felt full of riders, and though the house stood solid against the prairie night, he couldn't shake the feeling that by morning, the land would remember a new kind of blood. The smell reached him before the sight did, acrid, heavy, a wrongness that clung to the back of the throat. Smoke rose in a dark column beyond the ridge, staining the morning sky. The rancher's son urged his horse forward, the hooves drumming against the hardened earth. When he crested the hill, he saw what was left of the East Range homestead. Black timbers collapsed into themselves, heat still shimmering off the wreckage. No sound but the hiss of dying embers, no movement but the restless sway of a half-burned door in the wind. He dismounted, stepping carefully through the charred ground. The air still carried the faint crackle of something giving way. A wagon wheel lay warped and split, a child's boot beside it, untouched by flame yet caked with dust. He crouched, running a hand over ground. The tracks were easy to read. 6 horses, shod, heavy with gear. They hadn't come to steal cattle. They'd come to make a point. A sharp crack echoed from the north. Not fire this time, but a rifle. His hand went to the stock, slung over his shoulder. Another shot followed, closer. He mounted and followed the sound, keeping to the gullies and low ground until the land fell away into a narrow cut of rock. Voices drifted up. 3 men, their tones edged with laughter. He inched forward until he could see them, 2 holding the reins of a skittish bay, one standing over a figure crouched on the ground. Her, the outlaw's daughter. Dust clung to her hair, her face turned down so he couldn't see her expression. One man reached for her arm, and she moved before the grip landed. Smooth as a rattler striking, she slammed her shoulder into his chest, sending him stumbling back. The second man swung at her, but before the blow landed, a shot cracked from the rocks above. She had drawn her pistol without hesitation, the bullet tearing into the dirt inches from his boots. The men froze. "Next one doesn't miss," she said, voice level, not loud, but carrying the weight of someone who had no need to repeat herself. The sun stayed hidden, watching her take the bay's reins and step backward toward the shadows of the cut. None of them tried to stop her, though one cursed under his breath as she passed. She mounted without looking at them, the pistol never lowering until she was beyond their reach. Then she turned her horse and rode straight toward where he lay hidden on the ridge. For a moment, he thought she'd pass without seeing him, but her gaze flicked up, meeting his square on. No surprise, no start, just that same unreadable steadiness. Then she was gone, swallowed by the twist of the trail. He waited until men below moved on, before circling wide to avoid them. By the time he reached the open flats, the light had begun to harden into late afternoon. He found her again by the creek, the bay drinking deep from the shallows. She looked up as he approached, her hand resting easy on the saddle horn. "You followed me," she said. "You were heading north," he replied. "North is trouble." A faint curve touched her mouth, not quite a smile. South's no better. Trouble's got a long reach. He wanted to ask about the fire, the men, why she hadn't called for help. But the way she sat, still but not relaxed, told him she'd offer what she wanted and no more. He swung down from his horse, letting the animals drink side by side. "They say your father's back," he said finally. Her gaze shifted to the water, where sunlight caught in the ripples. "They say a lot of things. That one's true." Her fingers tapped lightly against the leather, a rhythm only she seemed to hear. "If it is, you do well to keep your fences mended and your doors barred. He doesn't much care whose land he burns." The words carried no bitterness, no pride. Just fact. She glanced toward the horizon, as if measuring the distance to something unseen. Then she nudged the bay away from the water. "You won't hear it from me twice. Go home." He watched her ride off, dust rising in her wake until the prairie swallowed her whole. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of rain, though the sky held no clouds. He stood a while longer, listening to the creak and the distant cry of a hawk, before turning back toward the ranch. Night came fast. He lit no lamp, sitting instead at the kitchen table with his rifle laid across it. The memory of her voice lingered, the calm in it more unsettling than any shouted warning. She wasn't afraid, or she was. She'd buried it deep. That meant she either knew something worth fearing or had nothing left to lose. When the coyotes began their calls beyond the fence line, he rose and checked the shutters. A single hoofbeat sounded in the distance, faint, deliberate, and then another. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. The dark yielded nothing, but the wind carried a whisper of movement across the grass. Whoever it was, they were keeping their distance, watching. He stayed there until the sound faded, the night settling into its quiet again. Only then did he go back inside, closing the door with care. Tomorrow he would ride the North Ridge again. He needed to see if the fire's ash had cooled, or if the land was still smoldering, waiting for the next spark. Morning broke sharp and cold, the kind of air that stung the lungs and made sound carry farther than it should. Frost silvered the fence lines, and the rancher's son traced them with a gloved hand, checking for breaks. Halfway along the north pasture, he found the wire sagging, drops of blood clinging to it like dark berries. The prints in the frost were fresh, booted, heavy, moving east. He followed until the land dipped into a hollow choked with sage. There, half buried in the brittle grass, lay an old brass button, the kind worn on a cavalry coat decades past. His father had kept one just like it in a desk drawer, a relic from his days before the ranch. The memory pricked at him, something cold settling in his gut. In town, the saloon was nearly empty, the morning's light slanting through dusty windows. A ranch hand named Merritt nursed a beer at the far table. When the son asked about the burned homestead, Merritt leaned back, his chair creaking. "It wasn't cattle they were after," he said. "It was a message. That girl you've been seen talking to, her blood's tied to it. And so's yours, whether you like it or not." He pressed for more, but Merritt only spat into the sawdust and muttered, "Ask your pa's ghost." That night, the truth began to take shape. In the quiet of the barn, the old hand Jonas told it plain. Years ago, before the ranch was built, his father had ridden with the outlaw himself. They'd fought together, stolen together, until a split over land and gold turned them against each other. The ranch was bought with blood money, the fences built on betrayal. The son listened, jaw tight, every plank of the barn suddenly feeling like part of a lie. He asked about the daughter, but Jonas only shook his head. If she's against her kin, she's got her reasons. But reasons don't change the trail you're both on. By afternoon, smoke rose again, this time from a neighbor's spread. He rode hard toward it, dust whipping his face, the air thickening with the scent of burning hay. The outbuildings were ablaze, flames snapping at the sky. He saw figures moving through the smoke, 3 riders breaking off with stolen horses. One turned back to fire at him, the bullet whining past his ear. Then she was there, emerging from the haze, her coat singed at the edges, leading a frightened mare away from the flames. She didn't look surprised to see him. Together they drove the last of the horses out of reach of the fire, their words drowned by the roar of the blaze. When it was over, they stood breathing hard, ash settling on their shoulders like gray snow. "Your father's name is spoken in their camps," she said, wiping soot from her cheek. Not with respect, not with forgiveness. He told her what Jonas had said, watching her face for a flicker of recognition. There was none, only a steady narrowing of her gaze. "Then you know why this won't stop," she said, "and why I can't walk away until he's gone." "Your father," he said. She didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. The wind shifted, carrying with it the sound of hooves, many of them, pounding against the hard earth. She caught his arm, pulling him toward the shelter of a half-burned wall. From there, they saw the riders crest a ridge, a dozen men, rifles slung, their coats snapping in the wind. At their head rode a figure with a black scarf masking the lower half of his face. Even at a distance, the sun felt the weight of his gaze sweep the land. They didn't come down into the valley, only halted at the ridge. One of the men rode forward, shouting over the distance. The words were clear enough. 3 days to leave the land or die on it. The outlaw's daughter stood rigid beside him, her eyes fixed on a man in the scarf. The sun felt her grip tighten once on his sleeve, then let go. The riders wheeled and vanished beyond the rise, dust hanging in their wake. He watched her mount, her movements measured but sharp with intent. 3 days, she said, almost to herself. Enough time to finish this. She turned the horse toward the hills without looking back, leaving him with the smoke, the scorched earth, and the echo of hooves fading into the cold horizon. The day of reckoning came beneath a sky the color tarnished silver, the sun dim behind a curtain of thin clouds. The rancher's son saddled his horse in silence, the leather stiff from frost. His shoulder ached from the wound he'd taken days before, but there was no time to nurse it. 3 days had passed since the warning. By sundown, one side would own the land, and the other would be buried in it. He rode out along the ridge where the wind cut like a blade, scanning the horizon. A single rider appeared from the north. Her, the outlaw's daughter, reined in beside him, her hair wind-whipped, eyes shadowed but steady. She carried no more than a rifle, a pistol, and the resolve of someone who had burned every other bridge. "You're going to meet him," she said, no question in it. "I am." "Then I'm riding with you." The sun studied her for a moment. "If he's your blood." She cut him off. "Blood's not the same as kin. Not to me. Not anymore." They descended into flats together, the silence between them broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the distant cry of a hawk. The air smelled faintly of rain, though no clouds gathered heavy enough to deliver it. Ahead, the land opened into a wide stretch of dry grass, the kind where every footstep could be heard for miles. The perfect place for a standoff. They reached it first. The sun dismounted, checked the rifle, felt the cold iron steady his hands. She stood beside him, gaze fixed on the horizon. Minutes stretched like hours until the sound came. Hoofbeats, slow and deliberate. The outlaw's crew rode into view. A dozen men fanned out in a crescent. At their center, the man in the black scarf. Even from here, the sun could see his eyes, pale, sharp, measuring. They reined in 30 paces away. The outlaw spoke first, voice deep and carrying. "You should have ridden out while you could." The son's reply was calm. "This land's mine. It was bought with my gold," the outlaw said. "Your father just stole the deed." The daughter stepped forward then, her voice clear as a gunshot. "And you stole more than that." A murmur rippled through the men. The outlaw's gaze shifted to her, the pale eyes narrowing. "You came back to me?" "No," she said. "I came to end it." For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then hands went to holsters. The first shot cracked the silence apart. Horses reared, men shouted, rifles thundered. The sun felt the heat of a bullet pass his cheek as he fired. Saw one of the riders fall. Smoke drifted to the dry air, stinging the eyes, turning the fight into a blur of movement and sound. A shot punched into his shoulder, spinning him back. He hit the ground hard, gritting his teeth. Through the haze, he saw her, standing over him, firing into the fray, her coat snapping in the wind. One by one, the outlaw's men fell or fled, until only the black scarf figure remained. The daughter stepped toward him, her pistol steady. The outlaw dismounted, slow and deliberate, his hands empty. "You point a gun at your own father?" he said, voice low but sharp enough to cut. Her expression didn't change. "You're not my father. You're the man who took him from me and left nothing worth keeping." The outlaw's pale eyes searched her face for something. Fear, hesitation, mercy, but found none. The report of her pistol was flat and final. He staggered once, the black scarf darkening, then fell to the earth without a sound. The wind swept across the plain, carrying away the last smoke. The sun pushed himself upright, pain flaring through his arm. She stood over the outlaw's body, her shoulders rising and falling with each breath. "It's done," he said. She holstered her pistol. No, she replied, eyes on the horizon. It's only ended for him. For us, it starts now. They rode back together through the cooling air, the sun sinking low, painting the land in copper and shadow. The fences still stood, the grass still bent in the wind. But something had shifted between them and in the ground itself, as if the land recognized a new claim not marked on any deed. When they reached the ridge, they stopped. Below, the ranch lay quiet, the last light touching its roof. The sun looked at her, saw the weariness and the steel in equal measure. You could stay, he said. She met his gaze, no smile, no refusal, only the hint of something unspoken. We'll see. They rode on, their figures long against the fading light, two silhouettes moving toward whatever the horizon chose to give them.